Welcome to the Flower Empowered. In today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about strength training with regards to the pelvic floor and why that is so important. In order to understand strength training for the pelvic floor, we first need to have a basic understanding of strength training in general, because your pelvic floor is, after all, a skeletal muscle, like the other muscles that you exercise, so your biceps and triceps, your core, etc. So they operate pretty much in the same way. So when we're thinking about building strength, what we're thinking about is increasing the contractibility of a muscle. Now, we talked a little bit in previous episodes about the actin and myosin filaments and how they interact. Now, what's really important is if you think about your muscle, it has lots of different muscle fibers. If you have weak muscles, then the likelihood is that you have less muscle fiber and those muscle fibers aren't as thick. So they're less able to contract. Now, if you look at a strong muscle, typically that will be a muscle that will be bulkier. So it will be a little stiffer and its contractibility will be more. So it can actually take more force. So when you are strength training, you are trying to achieve a contraction that recruits all of your muscle fibers. When you're working on your pelvic floor, you're trying to get as much of the pelvic floor as possible to fire up in order to create the contractions. With traditional muscle training, you use a measure to assess your strength. So if you're familiar with muscle training, you know maybe about your 1 rep maximum. And this is the maximum amount of weight that you can lift with a single muscle. So for example, if you're doing a bicep curl, it will be the 1 rep maximum will be the weight that will provide the most resistance so that you recruit as much of that muscle as possible. Now, it's hard to assign a 1 rep maximum to your pelvic floor because obviously we're not typically using a weight when we're doing our contractions, but we need some sort of a scale to be able to assess what kind of contraction we're doing. With your 1 rep maximum, that will be a contraction that after you do it, you're not able to use your muscle immediately. You need to rest before you can do something again. And as you may know, when you're doing muscle training, you're never just going to do a single contraction. When you do your pelvic floor exercises, you do multiple squeeze and lifts. You don't just do one single contraction, you do many contractions. But the way that you do your contractions and the rate of effort that you expend when you're doing these contractions plays a very, very important role in increasing the strength. What the science tells us is that you need to be doing maximum contractions in order to build strength. So when you're training your pelvic floor, if you're just doing small contractions, you can do, I've seen many times it advised to just do 10 contract and releases 3 times a day for whatever number of weeks. You will see a little bit of an improvement because of course you're using your muscles, but you're not going to see step gains in your improvement because you're not putting the muscles under stress. In order to improve, you really have to stress your muscles. And there's many different techniques that we can use in order to stress the muscles. So in my upcoming book, I actually use a scale, so it's this scale which shows the rate of perceived effort. And with this scale, in the coming weeks, we're going to do a couple of additional videos where we will use different effort levels when we're doing our pelvic floor exercises. And what this can do is help you to actually bring your muscle to hypertrophy. So hypertrophy is when you actually increase the number and the thickness of your muscle fibers. So you produce growth in your muscles, and it's very, very important that you use different types of contraction and that you use different levels of contraction, so different force, and in some cases, yes, maybe weight, maybe different positions. So we'll change the position of our legs because that of course is changing the position of the pelvic floor, which is adding something extra when you're doing your pelvic floor training. If you approach your pelvic floor like you would other muscles in your body, you will produce better, stronger contractions. You will create stronger muscles and you will help to lift your pelvic floor just a little. And that extra support can help to prevent pelvic organ prolapse. Or if you have the symptoms of pelvic organ prolapse, that extra lift that you get when you do good pelvic floor exercises will also help to improve any symptoms that you may be having. If you liked this video, please feel free to like, share or comment. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. And remember to talk about pelvic floor dysfunction. If we talk about these things, we can really change the way that people think. We bring the subject out of the darkness into the light, and it is less likely that we will have people suffering in silence. Together, we can and will make a difference.